Welcome to this week's episode of Hormones, Metabolism, and You. I'm your host, Dr. Cassie Smith. I'm a functional endocrinologist based out of Oklahoma City. Today on this episode, we're really diving deep into your gut health once more. On this episode, we are tying together skin issues. So whether that be acne, rashes, eczema, with your gut. We're also talking about how stress that you feel, or maybe you don't even feel, can affect your gut, your skin, your mood, and your weight. In addition to that, we talk about some of the myths that you hear on social media, Instagram, Facebook, myths around restrictive dieting, keto diets, diets that cause you to no longer eat any dairy, no sugar, no gluten. Just, are these things good? Do they actually work? Do they improve your hormones? Do they make your hormones worse? How does your adrenal play into all of this? And so we really just dive deep into lots of questions. Why do people get acid reflux? What does that mean? Why do we have rashes? Why is our skin dry? Why do we have acne, especially during certain times of the month? And, does stress really play that big of a role in our gut health and our health overall? And so if you haven't noticed, I've started this trend on my podcast where we talk more about gut health, and it's because I truly believe it's a pillar of health. And I want you to realize all the things that go into making your gut healthy, all the symptoms you can have when your gut is not healthy, sometimes not even related to what you would think would be gut health, like hand rashes. And I want you to be able to just start putting these puzzle pieces and blocks together so that you actually truly can become healthy and heal and be a better, healthier person. So Christa Biegler is an award-winning dietitian nutritionist who hosts the Less Stressed Life podcast, and she's the author of the Eczema Relief Diet and Cookbook. She helps healthy, savvy women overcome eczema, food sensitivities, and fatigue without unnecessary restriction, endless testing, and supplements. She has a passion for subclinical thyroid issues and the nerve system as well. She lives with her unicycling husband and kids in the Midwest, close to me in South Dakota. I hope you enjoy this episode. So today I have Christa Biegler, and I'm super excited to chat with her. We are going to talk about lots of things related to your gut. She is kind of an expert in the field of skin issues with your gut, but also stress and just how different things, whether you realize you have stress or not, can affect hormones and your gut. And so I'm super excited to have you here today. I know that you've built this unique niche around helping women with eczema, food sensitivities, fatigue, things like that, without a lot of restriction, which a lot of people like. So you're not big on like heavy restriction or endless testing. So I kind of want you to start by telling people what inspired you to approach healing in this way.
Well, I don't know if we're inspired as much as we become desperate, right? That's the expression, is that you're moved to change either from inspiration or desperation. It's usually the latter. And so also my story, I was actually I'm a dietitian as a background. And so of course I thought modifying your diet is pretty cool. And so I got into food sensitivity work about 10 years ago, and it was great. The short version, it was great until it wasn't great. And then we layered in other pieces, right? Micronutrient testing, we layered in gut testing, etc. And at the end of the day, I always think that life is about high quality questions that you ask yourself. And so to zoom way forward, right? To zoom way forward, I was asking myself, how could I help people get results faster and help reduce the expense? Because something I'm seeing now in our space, or the functional or integrative medicine space, is sometimes people come in with thousands of dollars of testing, but not a lot of results. And so that was starting to really bug me quite a bit. And so I was just asking myself powerful questions on how could we get results faster? And I think that if you zoom into, what I don't love is when we give all of the power to the test, but we aren't giving a lot of power to the symptoms. So I'm also really big on understanding your body from a symptom perspective. I call them biosignals. And so if you understand how different biosignals relate to different systems in your body, and you start to support those systems holistically, symptoms disappear. And so I just started thinking a little bit like that. My brain is a bit strategic. And so that's how it didn't happen because I thought, wow, this is, it was like it was pain and new iterations. And so, of course, my story is that way as well. But some other things I was getting tired of seeing was kind of the even orthorexia that can come after food has been restricted. Because if people restrict food, and this is probably one of the most challenging or toxic things that can happen, because for years and years and years you would go into a functional or integrative medicine provider and they would recommend doing some kind of diet change, and obviously diet is foundational and amazing and it informs everything else, but if you're not digesting what you're putting in, right, then nothing really matters. And so I was just trying to get to the root of the root of the root. And so unfortunately, sometimes we restrict food and it works for a little while, but it's really secondary to primary issues in the gut, namely, of course, in how the immune system is being informed, how the immune system is getting communication. And so when we're doing something secondary, we're only going to get results so long. We see this all the time, right? People do this thing and it gives them results for a while and then it doesn't. And so something that was also a travesty to me was, with enough restriction, your immune system is going to get the signal like nothing is safe. And so you end up really influencing your stress hormones quite a lot as well. And then you can end up being quite hypersensitive. So it becomes this quite a double-edged sword if people over restrict for too long. And I'm sure you see this, and I've seen that whole gamut, right? Where it's like great until it's not great to an extent. And so I wanted to just get to the point of, okay, what is going to give us the most synergistic, holistic, feel good version at the end that doesn't feel over restrictive or doesn't feel like you can't have birthday cake. I'm a big fan of enjoying your birthday, having birthday cake, right? And so, it's like, what is the point of health when we're not enjoying life, right? I feel like when it's adding stress, it's contradictory. So that is, I'll call it the short version, right? It's, how do you talk through 10 years of like iterations and changes and things, but things work and then they don't, and then you improve. And so I'm a lifelong improver, lifelong learner, lifelong improver.
Yeah, I think that's a very powerful point. Like, I have a lot of people who come to me too with tens of thousands of dollars worth of testing or doctor's visits or programs. And to your point, like, sometimes they've just tried and restricted and failed in so many different ways. And it's like, we need to like pull the covers back and say, well, what is causing all this to begin with, right? And I think that you and I agree in the fact that a lot of times people are not supporting some systems that they need to support before they're trying to get better, right? So you and I were talking about that before this podcast. So what are some of the systems like that you feel like people need to actually look at to become well? Like, what are the things we can't ignore?
Yeah. I bucket it into 3 systems, and then of course there's different pieces to each, and then I'll talk a little bit more about maybe the bucket that is the one that you talk about the most. So the first system is gut and immune system, because most of the immune system is stored in the gut. If you've listened to podcasts, if you are learning, you probably have learned that, right? And so what's happening in the gut? The challenge is that we think about, all handle the gut in a different way. And that's not necessarily a problem. There's multiple ways to get to the right answer, or the right answer for you, or to get to success. But my answers for this do not include endless restriction. They improve helping the gut all of my approach is helping a system function optimally, right? And I was talking, and I group gut and immune system because the immune system is largely stored in the gut, but I want to think about, there's so many different things that inform that immune system as well. So anyway, gut and immune system is one bucket. Another bucket is drainage and detoxification. And you said earlier that I work a lot with skin. So naturally, I'm going to talk a lot about drainage and detoxification, because the skin is a very safe place for the body to dump trash. And speaking of inspiration and desperation, people can have gut issues for a long time. It's always easier if someone realizes, wow, I don't have a perfect banana bowel movement every day, right? What else could be going on there? Because sometimes our subjective impression is that gut issues have to be this like raging thing. And I would say that having a skin issue is having a digestion issue, as well as a drainage and detoxification issue, because the body is going to put trash that it cannot handle right now onto the skin. And so that shows up in acne, psoriasis, eczema, etc. And you'll even see that ebb and flow throughout the month because of hormones ebbing and flow throughout the month, right? And so drainage and detox, all of the systems have complexities, right? So there's at least four systems in the drainage path, for drainage pathways at least, probably more, right? And then the other, so that's just one bucket. And then the last bucket to me is stress hormones. And so I break that down because stress hormones to me go before sex hormones. Everyone wants great progesterone. Everyone wants great libido. Everyone wants all of these things for their sex hormones. But it's like you've got to start at the stress hormones first. And most stress, I always think of from the hierarchy from my standpoint, is the adrenals are the most underrated stress hormones, or the most underrated conventionally. And I say that without, very neutrally. Like, don't be angry with your provider if they're not talking about your adrenals with you, because it's sort of an underrated conversation. Our testing is not uniform, our approaches are not uniform, and so unfortunately we get kind of it's everything from acknowledged to completely ignored. And I always say, don't blame your provider, their adrenals are probably taxed as well, because we live in this crazy world. So that goes first, because I don't think the thyroid cares about helping set your metabolic pace if your body's running from a tiger, even though it's not running from a tiger, if stress hormones are really prevalent. And then finally, sex hormones. But generally, I'm going to hang out. Supporting your adrenals is not a short-term thing. It's really an ongoing thing, but there's lots of things we can do. I would say, like, all of these systems we can break down to at least 3 pieces typically, but I'm sure you talk about all types of hormones all the time, and so I'm sure you talk about all the complexities of thyroid, etc., but I just bucket it into stress hormones.
Yeah, so I like that. So your gut, you like that. You like drainage, detoxification, and then adrenal. So this leads me to a lot of different questions I want to ask you, but let's start with the skin because you said that. So tell me, or tell listeners, I see people a lot, and you talk a lot about eczema, who come in and say, well, I have this rash, which a lot of people just get termed eczema because they've seen a million doctors put 6 different creams on it. It's never gotten better, and they don't know what it is. And so I see a lot of these, I have eczema, it won't go away, I've tried all these creams. And I talk a lot about how a lot of times that can be from your gut. And I think that you agree with that, but also like you said, the detoxification system of your body. And you brought up a good point prior to the podcast when we were chatting. So tell people, if somebody's listening to this and they're struggling with skin issues, whether it be breakouts at certain times of the month, a skin rash they can't get rid of, how could that be brought back and related to your gut? And what can you do to make that better?
Yeah, so it's actually related to all of those buckets, all of those systems, and it depends on how the eczema looks specifically. And one of the primary problems with how we handle eczema as a topical issue is we treat it like it's all the same. And by looking at it, by looking at where it's presenting, how it's presenting, and how it's acting, you can direct it actually to one of those different systems being the priority. So if the gut is the priority, and usually for all children, the gut is typically the priority, but if it's red, angry, rashy, round, kind of how you would normally think of it, the gut is typically the priority. And so what else is going on there that we can all kind of like wrap our brain around? And so the skin grows from how do we grow skin? It grows from the inside out, right? And so something we do universally agree about with eczema specifically is that there's an overgrowth of bacteria on the skin. Staph aureus being overgrown on the skin. Like, that is universal. We actually do agree about that. But you know what I would see on 100% of gut tests that I ran on people with eczema is overgrowing staph and strep inside of the gut every single time. But it was not the only one, right? There was also other imbalances, dysbiosis, weeds, right, in the gut. And I always use this silly analogy. I think that we're a lot like a lawn. I think we are a lot like a mirror, a direct reflection of nature. We are all nature. And I don't mean that in this weird way. It's just like, duh, of course we are, right? Like, we're all on this planet together. And so if you think about looking at a dandelion in the lawn, any kind of weed uses up your nutrients and it gives off its own seeds or toxins, right? And so I know just recently you had a podcast, and one of your guests, I remember learning so much about him on endotoxins that come from these weed type bacteria. And so these endotoxins, they'll cross the blood-brain barrier and cause brain fog, right? The body's got to do something with this trash. And so there's an increase of trash when there's a lot of weeds going on in the gut, or this imbalance. And so it's just a safe place to put the weeds or the trash is on the skin. And so that's how the gut is specifically part of the conversation related to skin. There's so many other pieces, right? If we talk about even estrogen metabolism, the gut can impact the enzymes that break down estrogen. And something that is not so random, people will say, oh, my skin just flares randomly at different times of the month. Or I I could buy you 12 sandwiches, Cassie, if for all the times I heard, oh, my hand eczema or my skin rash started after pregnancy. I'm like, well, here are some possibilities that could have happened after that time. So it's related to, depending on how it's presenting in the story and all those things, it's related to every one of those buckets. But from the gut specifically, usually it's going to look red and angry. Usually it's going to maybe be a little bit better in the morning, usually a little bit worse in the afternoon. It can be all over. Usually when eczema starts, it's in the elbows or behind the knees, but it can be anywhere. As well. There's I could talk endlessly about that particular topic, so I'll leave it there for a second.
So yeah, and you have a cookbook, right? The Eczema Relief Diet Cookbook.
I did write a cookbook, and so I want to be really clear. I worked with a company to write a cookbook, and they made me cut 10,000 words. Do I think that this cookbook will solve all of your problems? It's generally like a top 8 low histamine diet cookbook. And this came out right around the time COVID started. So it was 2020. So it was 5 years ago. I've probably gone through like 2 or 3 human iterations since then. But specifically what's important about that particular book is that it can be really helpful for supporting gut-mediated eczema for sure. It can help with mitigating some of that, but remember that food is secondary to other things that are going on. And I remember, when you write a book, I think you just finished writing a book, you want to help people as much as possible. And so I remember the publisher said, Christa, this is a cookbook, not a textbook. And so they cut 10,000 words out of it. And so I don't mean that positively or negatively. I just like to be really transparent and honest about, people have given me great feedback about the cookbook, but generally it's a histamine, which is a whole nother separate food topic that's secondary, which is super relevant, right? From hormone perspective to skin perspective to anxiety, like all kinds of different symptoms, low histamine and top 8. And so it can provide some relief for sure if all you're eating is like a smorgasbord of histamine as well.
So 2 things, Christa. Number 1, it sounds like maybe you should write a book about
like a textbook.
Number 2, so if we could run your book through AI and it would generate 5 tips that would help people struggling with skin issues in general, like not overwhelming, but just 5 tips people could use to transform their diet, what 5 tips would AI pull out of that cookbook?
Okay, I'm just going to make sure I hear you really clearly. So people could transform their diet to improve their skin. So most skin or most eczema has a histamine connection. So I will say that. I'll try to be brief about this. Second, it's top 8 because often there can be eczema is just part of the atopic march, eczema, allergies, and asthma. So it's very common that one of those top 8 allergens can be partially driving it. I would say histamine is much more likely, and my goal is generally to overcome things. So that's why it's histamine top 8. And then also in that book, I talk about the health triad and how you can go about every symptom from this nutritional chemical angle, right? You can go about it from a physical angle. So if you're talking about skin, how are we supporting the skin structure, any infections going on topically, or what's coming in from the environment? So that's the structural angle. And then the last one is the emotional energetic angle. And so I always think that there's always an emotional relationship to every symptom as well. So those would be 3 things. I think I probably also talk about the same systems that we just talked about, gut, drainage, etc. It's just like very briefly mentioned overall. So you're taking me back 5 years. What else could I tell you about that?
Are there tips that somebody could get out of that book as far as how they could change their diet? Like, should they
totally? I mean, that's what. So there's, now that I'm thinking about it, there's like 3 phases, and so as one of the really important things that I think is necessary, so this is great, is that if you are going to change your diet, usually you can see big shifts with the diet within 3 weeks. The challenge is when people stay really restricted for a very long time. So in this book, we do a low histamine top 8 free for about 2 to 3 weeks. So there's certain immune system cells that have a half-life about 10 to 14 days. And so you can actually see those changes within 10 to 14 days. Depends on how your eczema acts and what its real root causes are. But so if it's gut mediated, especially, you'll usually see that. And so within 2 to 3 weeks, but 3 weeks is almost always the answer for like implementing something and seeing a shift, and then you want to broaden and you go path of least resistance back into it. But is that, I think the question is, can you heal your gut from restricting food. And I am not sure I believe that you can heal your gut from restricting food. And so there's that piece as well. It's like, well, how are you going to bring that bacteria back into balance? And there's, again, multiple options. I think the other thing that I don't know how well the book goes over, but it's like, how well are you digesting? Because stress is always compromising digestion. And I think I always make a joke. And I was so happy the other day, one of my clients, I said something, she was guessing something. She's like, and I make this joke all the time that they can put on my tombstone like no one was digesting. And so it just makes me laugh because she brought that up. She's like, was no one digesting? And I'm like, because we were talking about tattoos or something really randomly off. And so I thought, it's so great when people know your isms, right? When it's like no one was digesting. So yes, you can do, and the other thing about changing your diet, Cassie, is that when you're going to a whole food, healthy diet, you're automatically removing a lot of toxic burden automatically, right? So that takes us to another piece of that puzzle when we're supporting skin. So when you clean up your diet, so to speak, and actually most of the research is, I would say the consensus of the research that I found at that time was that literally having a cleaned up diet, meaning not so much ultra high processed foods, was actually like the biggest consistent needle mover with skin and diet as well. And so as long as you had, and I would say most people come into me at this point with that already, right? They come in with a really healthy diet. They've already changed all their laundry detergents and all that kind of stuff. Usually people aren't coming to me for that basic stuff. They've figured that out from the internet, at least, if not their friends. And so, but that's the other side effect to changing your diet, is that often you're removing these, I think, things that we were never meant to digest, right, with these ultra processed foods. And I don't mean that in some way like from a pedestal at all. I'm a very normal person who enjoys life, who may have ultra processed foods when traveling or whatever, but life is always a mix of doing the best possible thing the majority of the time, and then also kind of just living your life the other little percentage of the time too. So I will bring that to it as well, because I think that's a different piece of, you can always support or help those systems work better when you're giving them good quality fuel and you're digesting and you're using it and it's actually functioning. And I think that's actually probably where stress comes in to be the most important last piece, no matter what, is that stress seems to always be the self-limiter on how well the diet is even working, how well a lot of your inputs are really working at all. Because it is really it really breaks it. Stress always breaks something. It breaks the system that would normally work. It breaks digestion. It shuts down immune function, right? It depletes certain nutrients, et cetera. Your body uses up more nutrients under a stress state, right? And so if your body is already struggling to perform at an optimal rate, stress tends to be the thing that slows you down the most.
Yeah, so I think you brought up a lot of good topics, one of which is, the 80-20 rule, right? So no matter what you're doing when you're trying to heal, if you try to force your body into never eating anything bad, this really, really powerful restrictive diet process, that's not sustainable long term. Not to mention when you do that with your body, and I want to talk to you about this, when you're highly restrictive, you induce a lot of stress on your body, which also affects your gut. But I think the other thing that you brought up there is you said something about you don't think you can ever truly heal the gut by just, restricting or changing your diet. And I think that's pretty important too. So I think that when you are really sick, right, when people come and they have severe leaky gut and really bad bacterial overgrowth and all these things, terrible rashes, I think that changing your diet, at least, solidly for 30, 60 days is going to be very impactful and beneficial. But is that on its own going to fix your gut? 100% it's not. And so I think in a lot of people, I want to transition into talking to you about this. You bring this up a lot as well. So tell us how stress affects your gut, but then not only how it affects your gut, but I like the points that you make about how a lot of people who are listening to this podcast right now have no clue how stressed they really are. So we have just internalized it. We live in this environment where it's okay to be doing 17 things, listening to this podcast, putting on your makeup and eating your breakfast on the way to work. None of that is okay. But we've just kind of made that as normal part of society, right? And so talk to us about how stress impacts the gut in ways people might not expect. And then also how people sometimes are stressed and don't even realize it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll go about both questions, I think, simultaneously. So, something I want to say to the listener is that I am your peer and I have also had unrealized stress, or I think we all deal with a certain amount of unrealized stress. So, unconscious stress is the stress you're like, I think I'm okay. I don't think I'm stressed, but shoot, I'm only bloated on the days I go to my nursing shift, right? Like the other days I'm fine. That's just like a real thing that came up for a client, right? It's like I don't think I'm stressed, but it's that this is I think that the particular audience that my heart goes for the most is like this high achieving person who's just really capable of getting stuff done and at the cost of whatever, right? Because our nervous system, like, it's got its own ideas about how it's processing all the information coming into it. So I'll talk for a moment about stress, and maybe I'll even use a little bit of I'll share a little story that happened to me last year that was, I think, I always like to like pull stories and share them with clients because I think that's how I think we learn through experience and stories. So I'll mention there's a few primary ways. I mean, stress, the more you learn, the more you realize, like, man, it just breaks everything. But there's three primary ways I think about a lot with how stress impacts the gut and the immune system, which I kind of group together a little bit because they both are huge for everything we've been talking about so far. So the first one that you're probably quite familiar with as well is that when stress is up, when we are going to deal with something, when we're in fight or flight, right, which is going from meeting to meeting to meeting, or running from this thing to that thing or whatever, or multitasking, your body is not going to digest. In fact, your body is going to down regulate or deplete stomach acid in general. And stomach acid is kind of the gate for everything else to come in. And so when stomach acid is depleted, a lot of things can happen. We're not digesting and absorbing nutrients from protein and amino acids, which make up our neurotransmitters, which make up our mood. And then it can take a long time, but there's quite a downstream effect to this. But also, low stomach acid is, or it's really this gate to letting other pathogens kind of come into the gut and set up shop overall. Like that's where stuff, as it comes in, the body has this natural place, so that way there's certain things that don't get beyond that point. Okay, so that's one issue that is just going to, in general, massively affect digestion. And when digestion is affected, you're going to end up with food sensitivities, which are a moving target. And so moving sensitivities are largely larger food particles that are not fully digested that are crossing the gut membrane at the wrong time, and the immune system looks at them as invaders because it's like, hey, you're supposed to be vitamin A, B, whatever, not this like chunk of an apple, right? And so it's going to look at that, even healthy foods, as a foreigner when it's not fully digested. So stress impacting digestion overall is a massive issue or burden. Another one is that it's going to downregulate immune system function in the gut, secretory IgA. So everyone has had this experience, in college or in work life, or even as you were describing, I think on air about sleep in your book and whatnot. When we have a higher time of stress, you can all think of a time you were maybe cramming for a test, and then so there was a stressful period, and then right after that you got sick. And so I don't know if I feel like we have all experienced it, or your sleep is depleted and you get stressed, or you get sick. So when the immune system is getting downregulated because the body's like prioritizing resources for other areas, the secretory IgA, or immune system soldiers, as I call them, get downregulated. So that's another way that the immune system, which is part of the gut, is massively effective. And then another one is mineral function, and so, or nutrients in general. So I always think about stress as kind of like the gas pedal in the car. And so the more we push on, the more we speed through life, and it's just like a kind of a good visual for us, the more we're kind of speeding through life in general, we're using up more gas, more energy, more resources. So that makes sense. And then as we use up a lot of resources, our body is meant to survive. It's always trying to survive. So it's going to go into kind of what I would call a reserve tank overall. And so it'll go into that reserve tank, but you end up kind of running high, and then hitting this burnout point. But in general, you're burning through a lot of nutrients. Nutrients are workers at all those systems in the body. And when you burn through lots of workers, and your systems are already not functioning optimally, or they are functioning okay, usually a period of stress that's kind of long term. So we consider medically, right? We consider the difference between acute to chronic about a month. So if you have stress that is kind of prolonged for a month, for one, you have a new baseline. You start to think it's kind of normal, even if you're like, yeah, I'm kind of stressed right now, but it's becoming your baseline. And two, after this period of longer stress, it's very normal for both of us, I'm sure, to hear people come in and share about something that happened to the body or something that happened in life. Or it doesn't even have to be something like an emotional or physical stress, or it could have been something else that came into your life. Pregnancy is kind of this intentional stressor very often. See a lot of things pop up after that, but we use up those nutrients under the stress, and if the system's not performing optimally, the system is now working at half staff or not well staffed. And so what happens when your systems aren't working? You have lots of symptoms, because symptoms are just the body's way of trying to communicate something. When your skin is breaking out, it's not fighting you. Your body's not betraying you. It's just trying to send you a stronger signal. It's just trying to let you know, hey, could use some help down here. I need some help. If you could hear this message in here somewhere, I need some help. And so often, I don't usually believe it when someone tells me that they have only skin issues. It's pretty rare that someone would say that. I'm always kind of looking for everything else, because I'm looking for all of those symptoms to correlate to those systems to say, okay, this system seems to be in the most dire straits, right? It needs the help the most. So like hand eczema, for example, is very typically stress mediated. It's very typically comes on after a very long stressful period. I see that all the time. So anyway, I don't know if I answered your questions, but I think unrealized stress is kind of the most challenging, frustrating thing. And I think that's something we're all called to assess and stop and take inventory of. And if you don't think you can stop and take inventory of stress, one of my favorite exercises is just to draw a line down the middle of a piece of paper. And on one side, just at a time, like put on 2 songs that you like, or some music with no words, or just put a timer on for 5 minutes, and then just write like what fills my cup and what is over here emptying my cup. And I think that's a stress inventory right there. And it's one of my absolute favorite examples. And I wait to do it too long all the time, right? But it's a beautiful thing of like, okay, what can I shift, or what are my options, or like, what can I do here? But that's a stress inventory, right? And if we don't think we have time to stop and take inventory, then you probably really need it, right? So it's how we make it sometimes the unconscious a little bit more conscious, is just like stopping and assessing where we are.
Yeah, I think that that's really powerful. I tell people like to have tea time with themselves, right? Like, so to stop and ask yourself really like, how am I feeling? Does anything hurt? Have I eaten today? Am I hungry? Am I thirsty? Do I need to go to the bathroom? I mean, these are things that like, I work in healthcare, and it's not uncommon for nurses and providers to not go to the bathroom all day long, to not drink water all day long. And so I do like the just like stopping and getting a vibe of like, how am I feeling? I think that you brought up some good points about stress in general. And what I tell people is, if you're having a lot of symptoms all of a sudden, like if you are tired and you have brain fog and you're bloated and you're constant, I mean, just all these random symptoms that you can't like put together, or you're blaming something and trying to fix it and it's not helping, then probably we have stress going on in the background that we don't even realize is going on, right? Because to your point, it affects your digestion, which is so, so, so powerful, because when your stomach acid gets out of balance and you're not digesting your micronutrients, you get bacterial overgrowth, you get leaky gut, which causes insulin resistance, and your cortisol to get high. It starts messing with your adrenals. And so I really think it's just important for people to, set and just think, how am I feeling? And if I have a lot of things that aren't adding up, and, symptoms that I can't pinpoint why I'm having them, then we really need to go back to the drawing board of, well, am I super stressed, right? How is my sleep? How is my stress? How is my gut? And I think when you do that, then you'll get a lot of answers. To your point, like your body can't send you a text message or an email or call you and say, hey, stop stressing out about, doing the laundry and making sure your house is perfect and this and that. Instead, you end up with a rash, or you end up not sleeping well, or you end up bloated. And I think it's just really important for people to understand that and put all that together, because people like you and I talk about this, but we have to remember that most of the world doesn't talk about gut health. Your providers don't talk to you about nutrition. They sure as heck don't talk to you about digestion, or how many times you chew your food, or how much you're sleeping. And it's just, we really have to try to start normalizing this and making sure that people understand it's a really, really important part of life and of health, right? So yeah. And so then with stress too, a couple of things. One thing I want to point out is you had a post recently about acid reflux and just like how a lot of people don't realize that acid reflux can be caused by certain things, and a lot of times it can be stress related. And so I think a lot of people listening to this could probably relate. Like I try to find things that people listening could relate to, and millions of people take PPI medications in this country, which is really sad. And millions of them take them for years. And these are medications that were made to be taken for 6 to 8 weeks, in an acute event while you figure out what the problem is and then fix it. So, can you tell listeners maybe some of the most common reasons people have acid reflux, or maybe just some things that they may not know about acid reflux that's causing them to have these issues?
Yeah, I love acid reflux also because I find it to be pretty straightforward physiologically. However, it is unfortunately, we are a little bit at odds with how we kind of talk about it conventionally, because if you are having acid reflux, usually, as you said, usually the treatment is to get something that reduces the acid in the stomach. And sometimes people feel better for a short amount of time. And I think, especially if someone's dealing with an ulcer, which we know, I've had such an interesting experience with that in time where I've had people that really are presenting like they have an ulcer, which can feel like a stabbing, burning in their stomach, quite acute, quite painful, quite really can double them over. I've had people where we think they have an ulcer. They try to go in to get an endoscopy. It takes a month by the time they get the endoscopy. No ulcer is seen. Of course, we're not going to sit on our butt for a month, so we're going to give them soothing things that soothe that tissue and heal that tissue that entire time. And guess what? It takes a few weeks often to really see that visceral change overall. But I bring this up because this is what I see all the time, right? Where it's like, okay, so you get put on this reduction. Here's the example of where it can really be supportive. But we are made to have stomach acid to digest proteins and food, as I was talking about earlier. And if we are not digesting those proteins or foods, then 100% it will lead downstream to fatigue, potential mood issues, potential skin. I mean, pretty much everything. It can cause everything if you're not digesting, right? Or if you're not even getting those amino acids alone. Those are huge. So let's talk about acid reflux a little bit more. So we talked about this, some of these pieces. So this will be great because hopefully it'll be a little bit of repeat information. But when we have stress, we're depleting our stomach acid in general. And if that's depleted and we're not digesting, there can kind of be this sort of like I call it kind of like back flux, or it's sort of like you're not digesting overall, so the body it just kind of comes back up a little bit. And so for some people, just adding acid can be something that they can do or they can trial. So it's pretty easy to find. Like some people will trial like a shot of apple cider vinegar and it will improve things for them. That was never me. I actually did worse with that. I just mentioned that there's always there's kind of a lot of options. And so there's like, here's this really cheap, easy option. You don't really even have to maybe buy anything, right? Type thing. But some people, they add acid and it actually improves our digestion and they stop having reflux. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is that stomach acid has gotten low enough where we have different kind of dysbiosis in the gut. So one that's very common that I would see all the time on testing, but is not very commonly picked up in conventional testing, is Helicobacter pylori. And our prevalence for this in the United States is, I think in the literature, I think it's 30-ish%. I don't know if it gets to 50% in some places. I know in the Middle East, it's up to 80% prevalent, and to the point where they actually chew mastic gum after. And I don't know that it's like that's the reason, but I have a friend from Jordan, and we talk a lot about this, and she said, yeah, it's like really cultural for people to actually chew on this resin from trees that can help balance that H. pylori or help correct that overall. Now, this is a little bit of a spicy topic, depending on who you're talking to, because if I say this and you go into your regular provider and get testing, it may come back negative. And I used to work in conventional care for 8 years before I went into private practice, and I saw this. I had a guy who had like severe symptoms because he was a patient we would see in the clinic all the time. He had severe symptoms. He'd go on intense antibiotics, things would get a little bit better, and then it would just come back with a vengeance. But he would test positive, negative for H. pylori. And in retrospect, many, many years later, I now see like that was never corrected. That was never corrected because You can correct the H. pylori balance, but ultimately you also have to support that stomach acid. And so, as you can imagine, stress can be an area where things get out of balance in general. The other reason it's a little bit spicy is because some people we're a little bit at odds. People say that H. pylori should be like a commensal normal organism in the gut, that there should be some there. But I would say, like from my perspective, working with real humans in front of me, is that when they have that overgrown, they usually had symptoms. So we would usually pursue correcting that imbalance or try to bring that back into balance. Also, there are some significant virulence factors that can be associated with H. pylori that can cause ulcers, stomach cancer, gastric cancer, throat cancer. And I'm just like, not willing to put up with stuff like that. I just think, why don't we prevent as much cancer as possible? That would be great. So that's my kind of take on H. pylori a little bit. Now, one more common cause I see for reflux, or maybe I like to use the words reflux, indigestion, and heartburn, and even group burping in here, because burping is the first sign of something not really being digested properly. And that's all we're talking about, is something's not being digested properly, and now it's like coming back up overall. And of course, there's all these other little like side topics, right, about spicy foods or foods that relax the lower esophageal sphincter and allow that stuff to come up. So there's a lot of like little nuance. But another thing that I especially see as a cause of low stomach acid is mineral balance. And so certain minerals that are depleted with stress, namely potassium, sodium, which you're not going to really find at a regular conventional provider's office. I've seen a lot of kind of alternative testing that has shown this, and the results have just been like crazy. I've seen where, okay, when these two nutrients are low, you're having a lot more burping. You're really digesting poorly because these are part of the ingredients to making the stomach acid that the body uses. They're just part of the ingredients. Nutrients make the world go around in the body, right? They help make all reactions happen. So these are part of those nutrients that are depleted with stress. So in short, stress is always a self-limiting factor with reflux in general, and it can cause, like, there's just a lot of adjacent issues. Like, is there also an ulcer? Is there also like inflamed gut tissue or gastritis? And if that's the case, we want to give a lot of soothing support to that. But our goal is always kind of the same, which is to correct the issues happening with digestion and to support them to stay corrected, and to let people know that because you fix something once doesn't mean you'll never have this problem again. You created this problem was created in the first place. And here's another really tricky one, is that we share microbiome with our families, and we share organisms or pathogens. We share bacteria with people we're sharing spoons and cups and whatnot with, and kissing. So that can make it a little bit interesting. I always say, like, look at your partner and see how their digestion, reflux, burping, etc., all of that is, because that's going to give you a signal to how at least the upper part of the digestive system is working. And they're going to be sharing any kinds of imbalances with you and potentially reinfecting you. Even pets can be a vector point with this. I've had some fun chats with veterinarians about pets actually having H. pylori as well, and we think that it's very possible, right, that a pet could look a person's face and potentially give them this organism also. And unfortunately, our testing is not amazing, but also fortunately, there's a lot of things you can do to bring that back into balance. As I was talking about earlier, mastic gum has been long used for a long time. We use a lot of different things, but there's always lots of options. So that's the good news.
Yeah, so I would say the points that I kind of would take from that are 100% H. pylori in traditional medicine is not well tested for, documented. A lot of the tests that they do have high false negative rates, right? So like the breath test. And then I've seen tons of people who actually get scoped and have biopsies, but then do a stool test and have PCR for H. pylori because they're biopsying one place in your GI tract, and H. pylori can live in more than one place, right? So if you biopsy a tiny piece of the stomach, but that piece just didn't have any H. pylori, and it's, there's the entire rest of your stomach has H. pylori, that doesn't mean you don't have H. pylori. And so there is a lot of kickback from traditional medicine. And then when you do have H. pylori, it's like, oh, let's just dump all these antibiotics in them so we completely obliterate the rest of their GI tract, when there are other ways to treat it. So I do think that acid reflux in general needs a lot more discussion from a holistic standpoint. I do think that a lot of times it can be stomach acid or digestion driven, but a lot of times it's stress driven as well. And so, it's just really, I mean, again, this is just kind of bringing to everyone's awareness how much stress can actually affect just your gut, not to mention your weight, your sleep, your hormones, and other things like that. So, I want to kind of start to transition into the three questions I ask everyone at the end of the podcast. But before I go there, there's one thing I want to ask you briefly. On Instagram, you talk a lot about myths like around probiotics or food testing or supplements. I think there is a ton of misleading information and myths, especially about gut health in the, Instagram space. And so, what is a myth that you find most damaging out there right now that's just kind of trending? And what is the actual truth about that? And if it can be related to gut health, great. But if not, if it's eczema, skin, stress, but like, what is a myth that influencers are talking about that's actually really damaging to people's health?
Well, I feel like a dinosaur on being on trend because to me, I feel like one of the biggest problems is over restriction, right? And when you're in the bottle, it's sort of like, well, hopefully that we've kind of moved on from this, right? But just going and doing food sensitivity testing and then restricting without any rhyme or reason or plan or strategy, I find really damaging. Or going in, this whole like stress reactive approach where it's like, I'm throwing spaghetti but just generally the over restriction for me is the one that kind of breaks my heart the most, because when we're over restricting, we're absolutely not getting to the root cause of something, and we're not really supporting any of those systems that are just begging for help. We're actually just kind of, I would say, masking what's really going on. And the real challenge here is that when people restrict for a long term, so when people go, what's hot right now is carnivore, and I want you to know, like, I have no judgment around people changing their diet or experimenting with food. I really don't care. I'm just not super interested anymore, right? Like, I've seen too many negative fallouts of this. But what I can say with certainty is the longer and more restrictive someone has been, it's almost like they just went 12 steps backward on trying to get them back online. Like, it is a disaster sometimes when people have been restricting for, I would say, like, more than several months. But if they've been really restrictive for like over a year, it is such a roller coaster. And they have developed, probably for some unconscious orthorexia, right, which is that disordered eating in the name of health. And so they're so obsessed with the food that it's like literally driving the stress. Like the stress is talking to the immune system, so like everything sucks. So that, I feel, is like so damaging. We've kind of come, there's been such a journey of it over the years. Like, it used to be in 2010, like all functional medicine was like, do this elimination diet, and I don't even know if that's as common now. But now I just see the people out there influencing for like, high protein or carnivore. And I think that there's a lot of options for people and you can do different things. I just get really worried that that's like the tactic and there's no other plan beyond that. And I would say that a lot of influencers that were once like, even the people who started Whole30 have really even kind of shifted into a more an approach that's a little bit softer overall, right? Like, it used to be pretty, I think dogma is the real threat in on Instagram or in the world, and it sells. So people are excited about dogma, and I think dogma to me is a red flag at this point in my career, right? Like, if you're too something, if you're too like attached to some particular thing or outcome.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that over restriction is a huge problem, and not only for stress, but lots of reasons it develops, eating disorders and things like that. The true flex, in my opinion, is if you can have muscle and eat a lot. I mean, if you have muscle and you eat a lot, then, I mean, eating is a part of life. I'm not saying it's, but it is nice. And to your point, like, to be able to just go and eat when you're hungry and eat until you're full and not be super restrictive on what you're eating, but nourishing your body with good nutrients. I mean, that is like the ultimate flex. And my health coach works with a lot of people at our office, and we have to do a lot of reverse dieting in people and teaching them that 1,300 calories a day for 7 years while we're doing 2 hours of Pilates is not the answer. You can do it, but you're at my office paying me a lot of money for a reason, and it's because what you've been doing for 7 years doesn't work. So you can think whatever you want to think, or you can, get on board and we can start reverse dieting you back into some decent amount of calories so your body's not always chronically restricted, your adrenals aren't mad, and you actually get better, but it's like this culture that we have. We grew up in this diet culture in the 80s, right, where it was like all the cardio, all the low fat, all the dieting, but it honestly doesn't work. And so I think that that is a huge myth that's very harmful on social media. And the intermittent fasting, like if you're 100 pounds overweight, or the keto, then do I think there's some benefit in that for a couple, 3 months? 100%. Do I think that you should do keto and intermittent fast 18 hours a day for the rest of your life? I don't. And I'll, stand on a grave screaming that, because there's, you're missing a lot of nutrients with keto, and you're missing a lot of, calories if you restrict like that long term, and then you end up with muscle deficiency and things like that. So I think that's a very good point.
Well, it's kind of like, are we the same people we were 5 years ago or 10 years ago? And so usually your diet would not stay the same. And I think the challenge, or to me, I think that there's always room for cycling, right? Like cycling something. And I was getting annoyed also by people being on the same supplements forever as well. It's like, well, why do you need this particular thing? Like if you cannot tell me why you need this specific thing, right? Then why? So I'm a huge fan of cycling, which is kind of what I think that's what we miss with dogma, is we miss like nuance and cycling, and it just doesn't always fit in that particular soundbite. So I agree.
Yep, I cycle my supplements. I cycle my exercise. I cycle, the foods that I eat based on the season. So yeah, I think that it's powerful. So, okay. Well, this has been a very interesting conversation. So I want to ask you these 3 questions I ask every podcast guest, and I don't want you to overthink it, but these are just helpful things. So the first one is, what is one food that's most beneficial and why, that you think currently? Obviously, it's not going to be the same as 5 years ago, but right now, what is your one beneficial food and why does it benefit you?
Yeah, I mean, the first one, I think I could have 12 answers to this, and I'm okay with that. Like, what comes to my mind today is just I'm like in wanting my son to grow me some more sprouts for those sulfur compounds, for those brassica sulfur compounds for detoxification. And this is just, again, cycling. Like he hasn't made them for a long time, but it's like there are these little tiny little seed super houses. And so it's just like sometimes if I can get my 11-year-old son to grow me some sprouts, then I'm like, I'm ready for those sprouts. Or I love, actually, this reminds me of just my love for herbs right now. And we're kind of like where I live, we're coming into the end of our gardening season. So I just made a ton of pesto, and I'll make some parsley pesto. And I am so obsessed with like freeze dried herbs that maintain so many phytonutrients. So we get more phytonutrients often from these like little herbs than we can from fruits and vegetables. So I remember when I first got exposed to freeze dried herbs, I kind of went home and threw everything else away because they were just so potent, so packed with lovely nutrition. And so as I come into the end of this season, I'm trying to preserve that and freeze myself some pestos and get some freeze dried herbs as well. So
Awesome. So the next question would be, what is one thing that anyone can do for their health that improves their health that's 100% free?
I would say what comes to mind, and mostly because I'm thinking about food and seasons, and you just brought this up in cycling, is one of my favorite things to support health that's like makes health cheaper is shopping seasonally, because we become creatures of habit. And so it becomes easy to shop seasonally by buying whatever's on sale, because usually what's on sale is seasonal, right? They have a lot of it at that time. And so it kind of is like a win-win-win, right? It's like buy the thing that's in season, that's on sale, and then you're going to get diversity from these different particular fibers that feed different bacteria in a better way. You're going to get all these different color changes, etc., and you're saving money. So I always think that there's a lot of free ones, but since we were just on food, that's the one that came to mind first.
Okay. Well, here's another free tip for people listening as far as digestion goes. Chew your food. Like chew your food, 10 to 12 times as opposed to just like shoveling it in your mouth. That's free, helps you digest it better, right? I was just watching people recently. I was traveling, and like watching people eat at an airport is alarming in so many ways. But one of them was like, I mean, this person was just like shoveling a spoon of food in their mouth like every 3 seconds. I couldn't even breathe that fast. And I was like, good Lord.
I like when I go to Europe, I like to, people always talk about how the food is so much better in Europe, and that might be true, but my experience there is like staying up late, lots of smoking, lots of drinking, etc. And they're having fun and they're really enjoying life and like stimulating I think it's opioid receptors, right, which also talk to the immune system. But I only bring this up because their rate of actually enjoying a meal is unparalleled, I think. Like they just enjoy meals and enjoy time. And if you want to see like how we are taught between our military and our school system, it's almost the same on on like the speed of eating, unfortunately. And so I had to really unlearn. Reverse dieting is a term that is familiar, but we need to come up with a term for reversing fast eating as well. It's like we gotta stop to chew as well.
Reverse mealing, like we've got.
I don't know what it is.
Yeah. Okay, and the last question is, what is one thing you wish you would have known about your health 15 years ago that you would have done differently?
15 years ago. I won't overthink this. I think it would probably have something to do with stress because, I ultimately think I went through 3 healing journeys and they kind of parallel all those systems. So the first one was skin, which was a gut and drainage journey. And then the next one was an adrenal and thyroid journey and stress hormone journey. And finally, I feel like my most recent one was around inner healing and emotional work. And I feel like a lot of people who've been in this space for a long time would say that as well. Like they've gone through a lot of just kind of reparenting or whatever, right? So to impact how their own nervous system is processing through stress. So I think if I could go back 15 years ago and I had younger children at that time, I would love to have some of that emotional intelligence work even earlier or even attachment theory stuff. It's like this stuff you don't think is actually relevant to your career whatsoever, right? I went to school for nutrition and I was completely unprepared for the amount of anxiety that walked into my office every single day as I started working with gut health because everyone was anxious, right? And so my own attachments, my own stuff shows up there, right? And how we show up with people. And I think probably an undercredited conversation that you've mentioned a little bit is that you were talking about how nurses and providers sometimes have a higher threshold for not feeling good. And I would say that for sure. I always see that with my nurse clients. It's like, oh my gosh, you guys have a real high tolerance because you see really tough stuff all the time, right? And so if I could go back and support myself with all of that kind of stuff earlier just to show up better, taking care of yourself is the most important. The longer you've been in practice, you realize that you can only help people if you're taking care of yourself, right? You have that own oxygen mask on first. And so I'm always asking myself 2 important questions. What's in best service to my client? But the other question that must always filter through but doesn't burn me out. And so that's a really interesting thing as a person who performed for results and really likes results in general and derived a lot of value from work, etc. And so if I go at 15 years, I would do some of that healing around performance-based mindset, etc. earlier whenever possible, just because it would help my own clients and myself a lot better. But no regrets.
I think that's a great answer. Okay. So tell everyone, Christina, where they can find you, what you have going on.
Yeah. It's Christa, which is okay. People say Christina all the time. No problem. So I'm over at ChristaBiegler.com. And I have a whole page of just different whatever's going on right now, ChristaBiegler.com/links. Recently, I just came out with a secret, like a little niche podcast called Unrestricted on how to heal eczema and food sensitivities without unnecessary restriction and endless testing, as you were talking about earlier. So that is something I was working on just very recently. I've got some other things in the works, but that page shows you everything. And I'm also over on Instagram at Anti-Inflammatory Nutritionist as well. I have a podcast that I've had since 2017 called The Less Stressed Life. So always looking to have more nerdy conversations over there.
And what's the new one called? The new podcast?
The new podcast is just like a niche secret podcast, right, that you have to opt into, but it's called Unrestricted. And that's just like a quick 10 episodes. It's bingeable. It's like less than 45 minutes in total, but little tiny things with some case studies. I talk about eczema types. I talk about the systems that need to be supported, etc. So I just kind of get into those little tiny bite-sized sections. So
I love that. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
It's
thank
kind
you
of a
so much.
nice, when you've had, when you have over 400 episodes on your main podcast, sometimes it's nice for people to say, if I have this issue, where could I start? And I would say, like, oh, you can just start right there, a few minutes at a time.
And so did you take old podcasts or you made all new stuff?
No, I just made new stuff. I actually, from the first time I published it, I actually redid the whole thing as well, just because it was meant to be short, sweet, to the point, and sometimes your first draft is not your final draft. Well, pretty much ever, right? Um, Never the final draft, but it was just something that I wanted to put out there in a way that was really kind of familiar to me and kind of interesting. So those are, speaking of trendy things, I feel like a secret podcast is kind of a trendy thing right now, but it felt right as a person who's like a podcast fiend. So
I like that. Secret podcast. Okay. Well, Christa Biegler, thank you so much for coming on and chatting with my audience. I know they're going to love this. Just some tips on gut health and skin issues, and we'll make sure that all your stuff is linked in the show notes.
thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it.
If you can relate to any of the things that we discussed in this podcast, like maybe you have a really bad skin rash, you've seen several dermatologists, you've tried tons of creams, but you still have this rash or this itchy skin. Or maybe you do feel stressed, and after you feel these stressful situations, or you have to go to this stressful job, you notice that your stomach hurts or you're not sleeping as well. Anything that we talked about, you have acid reflux and you don't know what brings it on, but you can't really make it better, and you've been on a PPI for years. Any of these things we discussed today, they're all a reflection and tied back to your gut health, also to your adrenal glands and your stress. And so if you found any of this beneficial or educational, I would like for you to do a few things for me. Share this with anyone that you know that is also struggling with this. Education is powerful, and this is how we demand more out of our healthcare system, out of our providers, and just in general as patients. So share this with anyone who could benefit. Leave me a review wherever you get your podcast. Follow me on social media and let me know if you like this type of content, what content you want me to continue to focus on, what sort of education I can provide you so that we're not just relying on myths from influencers on Instagram. And lastly, if you have not seen our Gut Health Accelerator webinar, I do a live one every month where I'll help you connect the dots between symptoms and teach you about the 6 gut health types and why they are so important. So you'll want to get registered to see the next one. It can single-handedly change the trajectory of your health. Modern Endocrine now has a license in 42 states. We're accepting virtual patients in every state, or you're welcome to come see us in person in Oklahoma City. So you can check that on our website as well. Thank you so much for spending this last hour with me and dedicating your time to learning more about your health. I'll see you next week.
The information presented, including any materials discussed, referenced, or linked within this podcast, are for general educational purposes only, not the practice of medicine. No doctor-patient relationship is formed from you listening to this podcast or utilizing any of the information provided. I am a doctor, but I am not talking to you as your doctor. The information provided is not intended to diagnose or treat health problems, or take the place of the professional medical care provided by your doctor. If you are experiencing any health problems, including problems you believe have been touched upon in any respect within this podcast, you should consult your doctor about the problems without delay. You may ask your doctor whether he or she believes the information I have provided would be helpful to you, but you should still consult your doctor immediately and follow his or her medical advice as your treating physician. I'm just here to provide you basic knowledge about the issues we discuss so you are more aware of them and can better discuss them with your doctor. That's why we call it Back to the Basics. Join me on the next episode as we continue our journey.